Okay, so now I've got my lay-in complete, and it's beautiful and dry and has created a solid foundation for me to begin to work the final painting on. And we're going to go into what's called first painting. So this is the lay-in stage. It's rough and it's very thin. And we're going to work with the principle of fat over lean, as in this is a very lean layer because it's cut with a lot of mineral spirits and it's very thin and washy. And now we'll begin to work with paint that looks like oil paint and a lot thicker. And I'm going to begin to refine this whole thing. I'm going to be working with a different set of brushes. The previous brushes I had were a lot of hog's hair brushes. And so I work with a lot of different filberts for the most part. I've got a few rounds like this, a few chiseled brushes like that, and a couple of larger filberts here. Now you can see the larger one has really been chewed up, but it's only for slathering in large swaths, so I don't really care. But this is pretty much what I'll be using. Synthetic filbers, the odd sable, and a few little rounds and a few little liners like this. I'll also have my mineral spirits laid out here as well, in case I need to be doing any more thin washes or I need to thin my paint down enough to be able to make it workable. But I'm also going to have some half and half here, and that's half mineral spirits and half walnut oil. You can use linseed oil as well, whichever medium you choose to use. And this is used to cut the paint to make it more spreadable and easy to work with. Some colors are thicker and more pasty than others. Others are very thin and very easy to work with. So it really depends on what color you're working with and the consistency you want to be working with, depending on what area of the painting you're focused on. So this is the mediums right here. I've got my little paper towels nearby, and I also keep a handy painting rag nearby as well. I've got my palette knives, and that's about it for the moment. So that's my equipment that I'm going to be using, and I'm working with exactly the same palette that I was before. I've got my reference image beside me on my tablet. I also have my little dual card system here that I'm working with that I'll be able to work with as I'm beginning to flesh out a lot more detail in here. The job this time is to go back in and simply refine. And I'm going to still be working a little bit patchy. Not quite so blocky as here, but I'm not going to be trying to get this beautiful finish. There's first painting and then there's second painting. So the first painting is making sure that I've gone through and I've basically patched everything in. I mean, the hair is still really, really rough. The skin isn't too bad, but still, I'm going to be going back, and you can see how light and washy it is here in the dark shadow area. So my job is to go back in and now begin to pick up a lot of nuance that isn't in here. And to be able to work those aspects of the painting in a much more refined way, and also to get some of my edge quality going here as well. Big form modeling, a lot of the different things that we've learned in previous courses, we're going to employ that, and then on second painting we go back and then we really refine. Okay, so let's begin. Mixing my paints and getting ready for this session, I'm going to be doing a little differently than what I did for the lay-in. My first priority, and what I always do when I'm working on a portrait like this, I always do the eyes first, because this is really ground zero and the central point of the painting. And so I find myself always gravitating towards that first and making sure that I'm happy with it. I just sort of get it handled. And then I begin to work out sort of on the peripheral from the center out of the painting. There's also a couple of reasons for this, because if things begin to shift and change, and they will, we lose our edges, we lose our shapes, all these kinds of things happen as we're painting, it can create a cascading effect. So if something's off here, then I start painting over here, then I start painting over there. Sometimes a little adjustments need to be made, and you can be like trying to fit the pieces of a puzzle together, and then all of a sudden you realize you don't have enough space here. So if you start from the center and begin to move out, everything is moving evenly outwards, and you can make those adjustments. I found that to be very helpful as I was being trained myself, and that's just a habit that I do now. I don't even think about it, but also because I like to focus on the eyes first. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix all my colors here. The good news is, because this is a limited palette, there's not a lot to mix. So I'm going to start with my yellow ochre. That's my base. And I move into my red ochre. my white. And this is kind of my first base. Okay. And what I remember from my last session, and I'm going to put a little bit of raw umber, oops, too much, to get rid of the high chroma. And I temporarily pick it up, my palette knife up, and I hold it up next to my reference image on my tablet, and that's how I can tell also if I'm reaching the right color and value. And when you're holding this palette knife up to your tablet, just squint and look at it through one eye. You don't want to get too caught up in distracting details. That way you can see if when you hold that up it blends, then you know you're on the right track. It's almost a little bit of green needs to go in there. So this is very common, the skin tone. Put a little of my yellow ochre and then the black together. They create a greeny tone, which you can see there. And it works as a perfect antidote to anything that's too chroma in the pinky. So it's not making it green, it's just making it less red, okay? So I'm holding it up from my reference material. That's what it needed, was a tiny bit of green. Pinker for some of the rosier highlights. Take some of this here, mix it in. Okay, medium pink and the very light highlights. Then you can draw from those as a base to build other colors. Now I'm going to mix the darker version of this. Harmonizes with what's already there. Okay, this is really light. It needs to be a lot darker. It needs to have brown in it. And I think it needs to also have some of this red ochre in it. Okay, so now I've got the majority of my colors there that I need, and I can be drawing from each of these and then adding from my initial palette to get any nuances that are going to come up. Okay, I'm going to take a tiny bit of OMS, and then I'm going to start with a relatively small brush, and I'm going to work on this little shadow that's right between his eyes. Needs to be a little bit lighter green. Like I said, I'm still interested in making things patchy. I'm not into smooth finishes right now. And I've got my apron on here and I just wipe my brush off. So my main priority right now is to simply refine the color that's in that area. For instance, the shadow that's between his eyes. I've got sort of a larger base color, but there's a lot more nuance in it than I currently have. So I want to hit that nuance. And I also want to soften the edges because they are a lot softer. Am I going to get into finish blending? No, but I do want to set up the transitions at this stage. So that's my priority right now as I'm working on that particular T shape that's between his eyes. I find this a bit dry, so I'm putting a little bit of half and half. And when I say a little bit, I mean I barely touch the medium. We don't put it in and slosh it around. We just put enough in there, just touch it, even then dab it off, so that you can just simply make the paint more spreadable. Even wiping it off on my apron now.
So I continue to work with values, color, and edges, and you can see as that shape in that particular area begins to break down, it begins to look a lot more realistic. Am I concerned with finishing? No. I'm interested in taking the painting to the next level. I want it to look more realistic. I want to have more of a finished elements. I want to refine the colors and the edges and the values so that they're just more accurate. I will leave a lot of the heavy blending and finishing to the next stage of the painting. So this is what I'm looking for at this particular point, to just soften the color as it moves up towards the hairline. It gets a little darker as it moves towards the bridge of the nose, and all of the edges are very, very soft. I'm also careful to make my paint thick enough to be able to cover the layer that was below and get rid of the very light, sketchy, and scrubby kind of marks from the brushes.
So what I'm working with is a kind of a daubing quality. Squinting my eyes literally most of the time because I'm really looking for those values.
So you can see that I'm using a relatively small brush, and I'm going in and I'm prepping my edges. This is very similar to what we did in the drawing programs. Once we'd done our initial lay-in, we then did edge preparation, which sets up the transitions for our different values and now also our colors. So we're using small little tiny daubs and strokes in order to soften the edges. Then I'll go back in with the other color, in this case the eyebrow and the eye, or the darker shadow, or sometimes the light across the bridge of the nose. We use the second color and it's wet on wet, and that way the colors can blend and we can establish the quality of the edge according to what it is. Is it a hard edge? Is it a relatively soft edge? Or is it a lost edge? And with the wet on wet paint in there, we can establish the edge quality before we move forward with establishing larger patches in each of the light or shadow areas. You can also see that I'm trying to add some of the nuance of color as it changes in that shadow value. It becomes warmer around his eyebrows, so I'm adding a little bit of the red ochre and the dark shadow value that I mixed up on the right-hand side.
It's more greeny. So I'm not noticing the different, so there's browns up in there, but there's also these very pale greens along here. And so just seeing those, going from broad strokes into trying to get some of that detail now, breaking down the color and values.
So you can see how the wet on wet are working together, laying that darker tone in the value shadow area, and then going back in with the lighter tone in the lighter skin tone, and using both of those wet paints to blend together. And you'll see that I'm still keeping it fairly dauby, as in there are brush strokes there, but I'm not being super careful in terms of making it beautifully blended. What I'm doing is I'm really working to hit the color note, the value, and really work to hit those right colors, as in you'll see in that shadow value in the bridge of the nose, there's a lot of different colors. There's greens, there's browns, and then it moves into a kind of a very soft sort of gray-green as a transition color and value when the edge is created there to create this kind of soft transition. So you have to look carefully. This is why you're really breaking it down and really looking carefully what each section has. And this is the time to be really making it accurate. Shapes, values, colors, and transitions.
And just putting a little highlight over there. Yeah, so I'm really working towards the values here. So back and forth, back and forth. It's quite deceiving. I mean, it looks really dark on the palette, and then when you put it up on the piece itself, so here's a case of something looking lighter than what's there, but because it's surrounded by something so dark, it's actually fairly dark itself.
So you can see the most effective way to be working with this stage is to establish your shadow value, then your light value, use the wet and wet to blend them, and then look for an in-term or an in-between value and color that acts as the transition from the light to the shadow. And it's kind of like three different stages or three different bars of value so that you can have the dark, the medium transition, and then the lighter value, and then simply use your short strokes to blend them in a patchy, sort of dauby way in order to give that illusion of form and the edge quality.
In terms of integrating the background, the skin with the hair on top of it. Okay, so whatever you want to come forward needs to be lighter. So in other words, there's this little highlight that's on the brow there. That's where the light is catching that brow. And then in here where there's a dark hollow, that's where you've got it dark. That means it's sinking in. This color here, a bit of red, is going to wrap around the brow. Oh, way too dark.
So you'll notice how I'm adding a little bit of the soft green, the lighter shadow value, to my skin tone. And that's what maintains a certain harmony, rather than having a disconnect in terms of the way the colors are mixing. The shadow value of the green is mixed into the skin tone, so there's a harmony there. That skin tone is always present. And so the green that's mixed in with it, yes, it looks shadow, but it also looks like it's part of the skin, and there's not a disconnect in that shadow area. So remember that when you are trying to mix all these skin tones, you have to have a base value and color that's going to act as a harmonious color to pull it all together. But the shadows in that area tend to be greener rather than browner. It's not about dulling it down, it's about adding a bit of a complementary color in order to get that shadow value in these very nuanced areas.
Stepping back, trying to get a sense of the right angle of that highlight, that where the eye comes in.
So at this stage, you can begin to see how this softening of the edges and the daubing of the color and finding that many more values and shades of that color, giving them a transition and just a broader nuanced expression of what's going on in that face by mixing a few more colors, daubing it, and making sure those shapes are accurate, how much more lifelike the painting begins to become. It's like the finished painting is just emerging from the fog. And so this is how the painting is developed, layer upon layer, establishing a strong foundation, and then just building the nuance and the details on top of it.
Small little sliver along here, but that can also be reworked. So I notice there's a kind of a shape issue here. This has to come down. It's the weight of the eye that needs to drop.
So as you're developing the painting, you will run across mistakes or things that are inaccurate and that you need to then go back and correct. You're not going to see everything at once. I mean, that's just a fact of life. So the adjusting and the correcting and making more accurate as the painting develops is just part of the process. Don't feel bad. The longer you're working with a piece, the more you're going to run across that. Also, as you make changes, it could have a domino effect insofar as that once you change something, it may affect the negative space that's around it, or something else will be too close or too far at that point, and then you will have to make a series of little changes. And that is perfectly normal during the development of a painting, that you run into things that you didn't see in the previous version of it, and therefore you make corrections as you go. And of course, that's the beauty of paint. It's only paint. You can just paint over it and you'll never know that the mistake was ever there in the first place. You'll also notice what's going on with the whites here. First of all, the white of the eye is not white at all. It's actually quite dark. It's a real mid-tone value. So you have to go back in and really take a close look at that. Both of the eyes, the white of them is very, very dark. The only thing that even begins to resemble white is the far left corner, a tiny little corner of the white of his eye in the central eye. And you'll notice how I've gone back up into the brow and I've had to build that white up. And this has been my experience, that whites have to be built up. It's not easy to just get one stroke and then have it be enough. Quite often you have to build them up over layers in order to get the effect that you want. Also, you're laying an underpainting. That white can be built up, over built up, and then go back in and then work with glazing. And this will give the skin a kind of translucent, very realistic look, and it's very, very effective. So building up whites in the highlight area is a very effective technique.
Great, so I'm just going to get another clean brush here. And I'm just going to soften that a little bit so it's not quite so harsh.
So you can see that there's still a patchy quality, even though the painting is becoming more refined. But I'm looking to make those patches very accurate in terms of shape, color, and value, and reworking any small mistakes that I can see as I move along, and I'm just working my way through each feature as I do this. Personally, I like to move around the face in kind of a clockwise fashion and just deal with one feature at a time. Right now, I'm dealing with the forehead and the left eye, isolating each feature so that I can work on the specific issues for that particular area with the different colors and values and the transitions.
Okay, so I'm going to take a bigger brush now and I'm going to work towards the forehead, and then I'll come back down around this eye.
So I've taken a bigger brush because I'm working with larger, broader swaths. I don't need the detail. If I had a smaller brush, it would be very inefficient to work in that large space. I only use the smaller brush if I have to work with tiny details. Then I move up to a larger brush that is just simply going to cover more paint faster and also blend better in these broad, smooth areas. I'm working with a filbert, which has one flat side and then a curved top, which is very effective for blending. Okay, so I'm trying to move with the form here across the forehead, and that looks a little dark. So now I also have to start creating edge quality that involves hair, which is not a very hard edge. It's going to be very, very soft and blended. And you'll definitely see a transition value. And also, when I go in and start working with the hair, the only way that it's going to look natural is if I do wet on wet, with the hair color falling over the forehead or to the side of his head on a wet on wet application. And once again, as I move up towards the forehead where the highlight is, I'm going to have to build those whites up over time.
Okay, so what I've also noticed too is that when I've tried to build up whites, this is pretty white in here, that's exactly what I have to do. I have to build them up. One little go is not enough. You know, I'm working with these forms, it's always been a case of layer upon layer to get the right feel for it and to get the right opacity. Also, you can see that Rembrandt's painting it's got a lot of impasto. In other words, it's thick. You can see the paint is built up and it's actually got like a texture to it. It's so thick. So I'll put a certain amount now and then I'll continue to come back in and build it up as I'm working my way through the painting. The thing is just you get to a point where you've built it up, but then you're just moving paint around. It's hard to get the paint to settle down, so you just leave it, come back later and put on another layer.
So you can see that these are daubs that I'm putting on now. I've been building up the transitions, clarifying the color, making it more and more accurate, and now I'm going back in and I'm making some little daubs of the highlights and, like I said, the bands of the colors, moving into the different values. It's a lot more finished than the original lay-in, but it's still not the final finish. It's just laying a much more complex foundation to build the second painting on.
Okay, so now I'm trying to make a transition color right here. No, too light. So I've got 1, 2, 3 colors. This one a little lighter as well. And then it gets pinker. There we go. I'm going to soften this edge because I'm going to go back over the hair. So it's not super smooth in terms of the transition, but it's in bands. Okay, so that's my thing that I'm doing. It's more complex than what was currently there, but still just bands of color. And this, with the white, like I said, I'll have to come back in and build it up. That has been my experience. And you can even see, just looking at it on the reference material, it is built up, and it's built up quite heavily, actually, with the impasto. In other words, thick layers of paint on top of each other. Okay, and then this comes down here. There's a bit of a ridge that's highlighted along there.
So you can see by putting that whiter patch in under the eye, blending the edges out, then I can go back in with my pink patch for the rosiness in his skin and then blend that in seamlessly, the wet on wet. That's how you get those very smooth transitions.
Okay, this comes up a tiny bit here. So I'm trying to get the shape of that light shape in the cheek area, which then so patching in all these little areas with the right color, and also trying to work with the form with my brushwork as well. So, and then it's just a question of trying to hit that right note. Like on the side of his nose here, it's a little too dark, so I've got to go back in and exactly lighten this up a bit.
So now I'm just looking to blend the right value patches on his skin and not overshooting the mark, not making those pinks or those small little variances around the forms on the nose, on his cheek and his upper lip, not to have them too dark. So I'm looking for the right color, the right value, and the right shape of those value patches on his skin, and then blending them ever so slightly to make them look like they're all connected. You can see how I make little bands of values, almost like a color chart, where you'll see each different shade of the same color moving towards either the dark or the light in order to create the transition. Right now you can actually see the distinction between each color. On the second painting, those values will be seamlessly blended. I continue to soften his hairline, laying down the paint in order to blend the hair color into the forehead, creating a soft transition. I also continue to build up the whites on the highlight of his forehead.
Okay, just trying to pick up this value on the side of the head to get the right shape. Then I can come back and deal with that more later. Okay, so just getting these subtle nuances here in the nose. Okay, and this is lighter along here, which makes his nose appear more bulbous, which it actually is. His features are not delicate. He's actually kind of a homely guy, but his features are quite rugged. Okay, the pink comes here. Then we go for a slightly lighter shade, so right along the edge here. Okay, so now I'm just looking at the edge of this nose. Combination of the pink and the green. Nope, too light. So now I'm going down to the whole other value shift from the red ochre to the darker green. See, that's where it works.
I continue to work with those small value shifts with the transition color that goes from the shadow value into the light skin value on his nose. And you can see that it changes at various points along that terminator line. The wing of his nostril is different than the tip of his nose, is different from the far right of his nose, which falls into deep shadow. So I'm really just looking for the right value and the right color and daubing those little transitional values in. When they're done correctly, it's amazing how it really begins to pull that painting into a more realistic look. And it looks like the form is beginning to emerge from a two-dimensional surface to starting to look like a three-dimensional surface, because it looks like light is wrapping around a form.
Nope, too dark. That's the real challenge at this point in the painting, is really hitting the right value note and the right color.
So at this point, I'm really working on the nuance of that nose, the shapes of the light and the shadow shapes, the quality of the edges, which are quite complex because they shift and change every couple of little millimeters, and then of course the form as the light wraps around the nose. There's a highlight along the bridge and the ball of the nose. There's a different value as the form on the ball of the nose turns towards the shadow value. There's a small rosy tone that's in the crook of the wing of the nostril, and there's various colors that are in bands along the whole width of the nose, from the very white that's right at the base and various shades of pink with a little bit of green at the far right as it begins to transition into that shadow value. So I'm just really looking at all the nuances in that particular shape, value, edges, and color. And it's tricky, and I'm going to just keep going back in until it all starts to come together. And I only focus on that one feature and that one shape for the moment.
Okay, so I've got a number of major shapes all worked out here while I'm working on them, and patching a lot of these different areas in here along this lighter area. So I'm going to take a break from this right now. My eyes need to take a break, and I'm going to walk away for a while, and then I'm going to come back and probably have to reshape the nose a little bit and then get into this second eye. And then I'll be dealing with the lower half of his face after that, and then his ear. So what are we doing? We're patching in. We're reworking some of the shapes a little better. And now that I'm looking at this, I see this eye needs to be widened a little bit. And so you'll be seeing that over and over again. And so just know that the image does morph and change. It's not carved in stone. It's constantly evolving. You're going to see things you didn't see before. And so you just have to keep going back in, keep reworking, and then you'll just kind of keep building things layer upon layer. So, and I'm trying to work with the direction of the form at this point, and in a much more cohesive and developed way, patch in where all the different colors are going with their shapes. These would all be refined in the second painting, but right now it's just a much more complex and a much more complete version of what was there before. Working with form, I'm not worried too much with edges, a little bit. They're not total blocky patches, but I'm not focusing on that too much. I'm still really working on shapes, values, colors, but just in a more worked out and fleshed out way in order to take it to the next level. There's always room for you to go back and repaint and keep working on things and refining. So don't worry about it if you don't get it at first. And this first painting stage is labor intensive insofar as this is where you're working out a lot of these smaller brushstroke issues, a lot of values, and then you're going to start going in and start working with edges a little bit more the next time around. So take a break, walk away, and come back.
I continue to work with the lighter shadow value along the bridge of his nose. That indicates a turning of the form towards the shadow. And so I'm looking for that combination of the color that's the light and the dark, and it comes up with this greeny tone. And I'm working it softly so that it blends with both the light and the dark in order to create a transition. I continue to work the small intricate shapes around the nose and particularly along the edge quality. I'm also looking to make sure that I have the right shape of the ball of the nose and that I also have the right greenish mid-tone value that creates that turning towards the shadow right on the tip of his nose, which then blends down into a much warmer, rosier tone along the edge on the bottom. So you've got this play of the cool and the warm together. Now, these are some of the really great things that we learn when we do master copies. We're seeing how other artists deal with these issues. It's much different painting somebody else's painting than it is working from life or from a photographic reference. None of the techniques are there for us to see. As opposed to working with a master copy, you're seeing how the artist dealt with a particular issue. And it's very valuable to see that and learn from that, and then have that in your awareness when you are working on your own work. As I move over to the right-hand eye, which is deeply in shadow, I have to remember not to get too caught up in detail. First of all, because there really isn't a lot of detail there. I've seen a lot of students put more detail in than is actually represented in the painting. So try not to overdo it, and also know that there's going to be a lot of red ochre and even a bit of cad red in there as well. It's very warm, but it does play off of a darker green that surrounds it. I also noticed that it was a lot darker than I realized on the palette. I had to keep going back and bringing it down and bringing it down. And the little light patch that is under the eye, you have to really watch that value. There is a tendency to make it way too light for most students. So be careful, observe very carefully, and this is a really good area to pull out your little cards that will isolate a small little patch of paint in order to really zero in on the correct color and the correct value.
I'm trying to get these real pinky tones in here, or very warm, rosy tones. It needs to be redder. It needs to be basically this red ochre. It just needs to be darker. Like that. There needs to be a little hint of the lid up here, but only just a hint.
You'll also notice as I darken that bright eye down that I push the value of the eyelid much darker. But because everything else around it is a lot darker, it appears lighter than it actually is. So be careful when you're looking at those lighter areas that are in the right-hand eye to hit the right value and not make them too light. They'll pop right out and they won't look correct. So pay attention to those values, and chances are they're going to be a lot darker than you initially think they are.
This is tricky in here because it's a combination of the green and the rosy tones, and so what you need to do is work with both. If it looks like both, it means you got to work with both. So I've got some of the green there, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to patch in some of the warmer tones, pulling more of the red ochre, and patch it on top. And that's how you give the illusion of it being both, because it is both.
So when you're running into these color patches that seem to be moving back and forth between two colors, you look at it one time, it looks like a green, you look at another, it looks a little reddy. It's because actually both colors are there, and the artist has layered those colors on top of each other so that they play off of each other. And so you can work with one color, lay it down, and then go back in and patch in a very sort of stippling way so that you can actually see both colors simultaneously. It creates a beautiful effect, but it has to be done in layers and generally with smaller brushes so that you could have both bits of brush strokes playing off of each other.
And I'm going to put a little bit of the cad red in there. I need to make that sort of brighter in that red area here in his eye. There we go. It has to be darker, but it still has to be pretty red. So getting this value down here, making it a lot darker. That was one of the things that came up when I was looking at it before, that definitely looked too light in value. Things are all relative. Now the eye needs to be darker because it's in a darker field.
So you can see how much darker I've made that whole area. It's much more intense. The value has come way down, and the right eye is also very soft and undefined. Don't put all the detail in there. It will backfire. And also look at how the different values are playing off of each other, as in the corner of the eye is very, very dark. The iris of the eye is virtually black. And then the eyelid, even though it's lighter, it's still a very dark midtone. And then the light that's on the cheek, you have to create that sense of form. It's quite tricky. It comes out and it peaks under the eye, and then it gradually, the edge quality then falls down and turns around under the cheekbone. So you've got to work with all those different areas and really looking at the soft edges around that entire area. So each feature has its own issues and its own technical problems that have to be worked through. And so by focusing on them one at a time, you can just zero in on what they are and then go through that learning curve.
This is also to make the white of that eye extremely dark in there. Okay, so now I'm standing back and I need to elongate this a little bit in here. Oops, needs to be redder, definitely.
So now I'm going in and I'm working on the right hand perimeter of the face where it meets the hair. And I'm doing the same thing that I've done before. I'm putting some of the dark value in from the hair next to the wet paint of the face that I've just put in. And then I will go back in and I will look for a mid-tone value that represents both of those things. And then I will begin to work that edge softly, blending it wet in wet in order to create a softer transition.
And this one is tricky, I'm finding, to hit that right little hot spot in there. Not have it be too much. So I'm having to make a little mark and then step back. I'm also looking at my black and white reference that's next to it, and I see that it is a little lighter here and a little lighter right on the cheekbone that comes out. And it's hard to see, you have to just step back and take a look. That I will have to go back in and rework. keep working it until I'm happy with it.
When you're working with values like this, really the only way that you can tell if you're hitting that note is to squint your eyes. Make the mark, work it a little bit, and then step back and squint your eyes and look at your reference, and that's really the best way.
And this here, this darker brow blends more in with the side of the head and the hair.
As we get into the right side of the face, you'll notice more and more the blending changes. We have actually what's called a lot of lost edges. In other words, you really can't define where the edge is. So we can see that the brow and parts of the eye, the hair, even the mouth have a tendency to have a lost edge. It's not clear and distinct. Actually, all the features, the nose as well. So this is a real blending challenge in this particular piece that you need to be aware of. And this is a mistake that a lot of new students make. They have a tendency to over-articulate certain areas that really are better left to be mysterious. Rembrandt was a master of this. He knew how to work certain areas with very fine detail and then leave whole other areas very undefined. And it was a great way of creating tension between the different elements, and also directing the eye to where you wanted it to go by virtue of creating a lot of detail in a certain area. And this is one of those really great lessons that we can learn from studying the masters.
The issue here is to get it dark enough on that upper part of his right hand face, around the eye and the cheek. So I'm just working that rosy tone in there around that form. Just to find that right value, which is a bit tricky. I'm doing some blending, but not super blending. And the biggest thing I find here is that this brow just continues to look too high. I have to just move all this value down here. And it gets very dark. And I'll deal with the hair later. Where you're having a hard time picking up. Is it red? Is it green? Like, what is it? Then it's both. That's basically what I found.
So when I'm dealing with the red tones in the shadow area, the problem I was having was that if I was putting too much black or brown in there in order to bring the value down, it would also desaturate the color and it didn't look red enough. So I had to go back in with some cad red with the black in order to at least bump up the chroma enough so that it appeared red and not just kind of a dark brown. Even though the cad red is so vibrant and bright, just mixing it with the black was enough to hit that right note of chroma and darkness.
And I take some of that maroon and put it along this edge too. Just feather it in. Okay, so I finished basically the upper part, the first painting of the upper part of his face from about, just about his nose up to his forehead. I haven't touched the hair, and I'm going to be working on this shadow here and the lower part of his face and the ear. I guess there's basically the bottom half of his face for the next part. What have we done? We've gone in and we've reworked some shapes. I had to rework his nose a little bit, and I've worked in some of these different values and colors a little better. And I've made corrections where I could see that, like I had to correct the eyebrow, and I had to work this side of his face, that shadow area around this eye quite a bit. I had to keep pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down, making it dark enough, but then also hitting that right value note right there in the little soft highlight that's in that cheek, which is kind of difficult because it's lighter, but it's still a shadow value. And so it's to make these values sit properly within the context of each other, and then work with what was going on in the eye, make that eye dark enough and sort of shadowy enough, and at the same time picking up on those real reds that were in there. And I found that it wasn't just the red ochre. I had to actually put in some of the cad red and black to make it vibrant enough. And that was one of the big things. I had to make this shadow here on the eyebrow a little darker. I had to keep pushing that down, reworking the side of his face, and then going in and feathering some very reds into this area here, which is, if you look at it, it's kind of confusing. There's a lot of green in there, but then there's red on top. So what you have to do is work both in at the same time. You can put a base of the green and then feather some of the redder tones on top and have them sort of playing off of each other at the same time. And that will also help create the sense of form. So, and then the white of the eye there is very dark. It could probably even be darker yet. So I'm going to, but I'm pretty happy with the way it is at the moment. And I will just continue in the next thing. I'll call working in the shadow value down there. I'll probably rework a little bit in the mouth, and then finish off the whole face. Stand back, take a look at everything, go back, make any changes that I want to do from there. I want to make sure that face is the way I want it in the first painting before I even get into the hair. The hair is kind of peripheral. And so then I'll go back and do the hair and the collar and all that stuff last, or after I've done the face. I really want to focus on the face and make sure I'm very happy with the way it's working before I worry about all this external and peripheral elements. So that's it for this stage. And we'll move on to the lower half in the next one.